Hello, everybody.
Huh.
Take a seat, please. Welcome to our final academic event today, before we go to the social event. I have the honor and joy to present our keynote speaker, Hubert Knoblauch. Well, Hubert, what shall I say? I guess you are a sociologist by heart. Hubert Knoblauch studied sociology, philosophy, and history at the University of Constance, where he intensively collaborated with Thomas Luckmann and completed both his dissertation and habilitation. Hubert studied also at the University of Sussex in Brighton. He spent a year at the University of Berkeley in anthropology. He had research positions at the King's College in London and at the Cornell University, and also a visiting professorship at the University of Vienna before my time here. Before Hubert became professor of sociology of religion at the Faculty of Theology of the University of Zurich, he was a Heisenberg Fellow, which is a very prestigious grant in Germany, comparable to a, I would say, ERC advanced grant, maybe. Finally, from 2002 to 2025, he was professor of theory of modern societies at the Technical University of Berlin. There he has been sociologist by vocation. He taught general sociology, theories of modern societies, sociology of knowledge, and a couple of special sociologies around which also research projects revolve. Religion, knowledge, knowledge and science, emotion, body, culture, and so on. And he is an expert in ethnography and videography, and loves to teach exactly these methods. Of the various honorary positions, I only would like to mention that Hubert currently serves as a vice speaker in the Collaborative Research Center Refiguration of Spaces at the Technical University, funded by the German Research Foundation. And he has research projects on space, digital infrastructures, social distancing, and such topics in this collaborative research center. Like Michael Barber yesterday, I do not like to spend too much time on publications because Hubert's productivity is breathtaking. I only tell you a story. During one of our lovely encounters, in times when I prepared my applications for professorships, Hubert told me that when he applied, after a while, he didn't list all his publications, but only a selection, after he realized that he then would have better chances to get the job. This was really frustrating. However, I need to mention the tremendously influential volume, The Communicative Construction of Reality, published with Springer in German and Routledge in English. And I would like to mention our co-authored volume, Social Constructivism as Paradigm, first in reminiscence to our together organized conference 2017 here in Vienna, and second, more important, in order to put your attention to our Routledge book series, Knowledge, Communication, and Society, for which we are happy to receive manuscripts. Hubert, we are looking forward very much to your keynote, Multiple Realities, Effervescence, and the Problem of Collectivity.
Yeah, I'm trying the sound. It seems to work. Back, do you hear me? Wonderful, because it's the other technology no one used so far. Thank you very much for the kind introduction, and thank you very much for the invitation. I'm really honored to speak here in front of the Schutz Circle, because Schutz has been accompanying my whole academic life, to say the least. I'm also grateful for the continuous appreciation of Schutz by the Circle. I've been teaching sociology, and it's really helpful and important to have such a background in order to be able to teach Schutz and to tell the young people that it's still important to do so. And even more so, the topic. When I was teaching sociological theory, I felt, aside from Goffman, of course, Schutz is the only one who really addresses these topics which are circumscribed by the multiple realities. And it's such, for the science, as Schutz says, for the science of social reality, which is sociology, it is, I mean, decisive that we understand the multiple realities of the society. So I think that's very important to work out this topic. And so I was pleased to be invited to that. Also, I'm known to be not a very orthodox Schutzian. As my teacher, I'm trying to relate what I'm doing all the time to Schutz in various ways. My connection with Schutz began very drastically when I became the Hiwi, the student's tutor, one would say, of Lachmann in almost 45 years ago. Because Lachmann then went to Australia, and he wasn't there, but he was writing on the structures of the life world, volume 2. And so we received Ska Wilczek and me, the two students tutor, who had been in charge for teaching, actually, but we received the manuscripts of Schutz to do the corrections, to find out when Lachmann is too Austrian in his dictum, for example, in the German version, which was, of course, the first one. But then also the thing happened to me. I was also in charge for the notebooks, because the notebooks had been part of the structures of the life world too, published in Surkamp, Frankfurt, 1984. And so I was in charge. Ska was much more Garfinkel, so I was the Schutzian one, and I was used to started to use the library of Schutz, which was next to Schubert's office and on our floor, and started to look up the text Schutz was quoting in the notebooks, which we had to reproduce almost in the very same way, and checking the books he was quoting stuff. So I started reading Schutz books. Various of his books he was quoting, not his books only, but the books he was quoting. Kassierer, for example, which was a revelation to me at that time. So I became very much involved in Schutz. And as you will see also in the differences between Schutz and Lachmann, which have been also a life topic to me in various ways until Lachmann's death a few years ago. This will be also a topic here where I won't compare them, but one should be aware of the differences, and they play a role in their book. I should probably mention that my Schutz connection continued because I became short-term the chief of the memory archive when Söffner came in 1996, or before 1996, for 2 years before Jochen. I was kind of in charge of the archive because Schubert had been gone already, and I was kind of keeping that. And I was also lucky to edit the volume on the theory of life world, one that is in the German edition of the Schutz papers. So my connection is very strong to Schutz, but as you will realize, I'm not just I'm a bit heterodox as to that. And the heterodoxy probably comes from the differences between also Schutz and Lachmann. And there's probably 3 topics which are decisive one should mention. One is the theory of science or philosophy of science. Schutz had planned in the notebooks, which was his legacy, as you know, the non-written legacy. In the notebooks, he had planned a chapter on science, which is missing. For, by the way, very, very good reasons. Luckman was incredibly smart in doing things because the theory of science Schutz was heading for was different from the theory of science, which was at that time existing. Big science, it used to be called, which didn't exist in the sense in Schutz's time, who was much more philosopher and working philosophically. And the second issue, that's the topic of us today, and my topic of my talk, are the multiple realities. You may realize, and I will tell you some differences, the multiple realities are an early essay, rewritten in various ways by the symbol essay, and of course by the notebooks, which refer to the multiple realities, but transform it very decisively. And there is a third point I want to go into, which is the reason of the difference. Luckman, although very strongly into the structures of the life, that what he was teaching. His introductory classes every year were the structures of the life for the first year students. And they liked it. They loved it really. It's kind of the structures of the life world. Nevertheless, Luckman, he was in charge for that. I'm as the victim. The third difference was Luckman pushed people to do empirical studies, not just do theory. He hated theory. He later, increasingly. What I want to do is first to go into to sketch Schutz's approach in relation to Luckman's, to highlight the specificity of Schutz at this point. I want then to relate shortly, it shouldn't be too long, to Durkheim's, of course, collective effervescence, to which I'm alluding in the title already, which in a way has some similarities and some differences. And then there is a very short empirical part, which you can share with me before I come to probably a bit daring, hopefully a bit daring conclusion of this presentation. The empirical research to which Luckman was pushing, you may know that he was writing in the sociology of religion since the 60s, as did Berger. Luckman, by the way, in a very phenomenological way. The theory of transcendences I will get into is one of the issue of the things he has been elaborating and which were received worldwide. His Invisible Religion, like Berger's book, both books inspired by Schutz, like the social construction of reality, have been working on religion. And so, surprise, my push into empirical studies was also related to religion. And in a way, I find it, and I follow also Lester Embry, whom we also will acknowledge here after his death, who says phenomenology is not, one should say, not only the interpretation of texts, but rather the reflective observation, analysis, and eidetic description of phenomena, which is to say, mental or intensive, and things as intended or encountered in them. The kind of going further than only the intended objects is the empirical objects which you're studying. And there is a range of these objects which have been strongly inspired by Schutz and his multiple realities. For example, we did a study in Constance on near-death experience, the first German survey, all German survey, Western and Eastern in the 90s, on near-death experiences, and including interviews and things, using the theory of multiple realities. The same similar phenomenon we've been studying are Marian apparitions. There were some nice apparitions in Germany in 1999, which were witnessed by video cameras. And we've been studying as well as, for example, channeling, auditioning. You may know these kind of things, which are happening, all things happening inside the human. This is Uriella, a Swiss seer who had auditions of a higher being and a community to celebrate it together. And it's not only qualitative studies we did. I was participating in a big survey on spiritual experiences in 20 countries, which are trying to look at religious and different and spiritual experience, or with Bernd Schnettler on visions of the future. I mean, visions of the future and déjà vu. So this was all kind of inspired by Schutz. You may remember that Schutz drew, this was part of the presentation today, very strongly on William James' varieties of religious experience in his description of the multiple realities. And James is very substantialist, but impressive also empirically. This is the kind of background. So why do you mention the topic of collectivity and Schutz? How is Schutz related to collectivity? Well, I quote Schutz from the notebooks, the English version. Social collectivities and institutionalized social relations are not real entities within the province of meaning of the everyday life world, but constructs of common sense thinking that belong to a different subuniverse. Perhaps that which William James called the subuniverse of ideal relations. For this reason, we can apprehend them only symbolically. But the symbols representing these entities themselves pertain to the paramount reality of the life world and motivate our actions within it. You find the same quote in the simple essay, saying collectivities are a province of meaning different from everyday life. Or as Schutz says, we are all in the same situation as unnatural forces claim to be. The state is a grouchy old man behind a counter. That's his version. And if you look at the structure, Schutz was designing in the structures of the life world. The chapter title is The Transcendence of Nature and of Society. That's why we do collectivity and multiple realities here as a topic. So that's a real topic to Schutz, and an overseen one, and one presented in different ways. Schutz, as you know, refers to various authors at this point. For example, Voegelin, very important, especially in his correspondence, who assumed that society is transcending reality. And in his political studies shows this very nicely. And also Birger Lackman, by the way, drew on that. Few people know that he draws explicitly also on Weber, on the legitimate order, on the idea that societal order is much more a concept of legitimation than a real thing. Francis, the German sociologist, then especially Anderson, who took it up, had this idea, gedachte Ordnung is the notion by Francis, and imagined communities later on by Anderson. And of course, later on, we'll turn to Durkheim and his idea about that, because the conscience collective and the représentation collective have a similar draw, as Belvedere has been indicating also, in ways which should be discussed. We didn't do that. Let me go on. To locate this kind of transcendence in Schutz, and this is the late Schutz of the symbol article and of the notebooks. I say Schutz, not Schutz-Lackman. To locate it, you find this province of meaning about here. Yes, we have the life world. The life world is constituted by others, by the pragmatic motive, which means into the outer world. But before you get to the small transcendences above, you have the world, the paramount reality, the cognitive style of experience. We have heard papers on that. Then this combination of action, working, conduct. Schutz says he prefers conduct to behavior because, of course, Watson and behaviorism at that time was a challenge. But in a way, he lost the behavior very often. And then the communicative environment, kommunikative Umwelt, he calls it, with physical things, marks, indications, language, signs. And then thinking is kind of difficult. You know, the science or theory as one thing, and then the finite provinces of meaning on which we have heard quite a lot, which he doesn't relate at that point systematically to this symbolic forms of social collectivities in a very clear way. The statement to that is the social world in a similar way transcends the reality of my everyday life. To make things clear, it's another form of reality, society and nature, that is another form. It's not so far from Schutz. This is his diagram from the notebooks where he also, from multiple realities, which he designed. You can play on that. I try to integrate, but I'm not very good at graphics, so it's just an attempt to do that. This is the Schutz part, and now let's look at some other difference. This is the part where Schutz talks about the transcendencies. The word is used twice in the multiple reality article, but in the simple article it bounds. And also in the notebooks, transcendence is the word. Transcendency is also probably whatever you prefer, both English words are used. And he has various transcendencies. One is the transcendency of beyond the manipulative sphere of action, the meat notion, as you know, transcendency one. And then he has this kind of three transcendencies of the social world. I will go into that. And then you have the other transcendency. This is the collectivity. Just to tell you the difference, then later on, Luckmann hardly uses collectivity anymore. I think in the social construction it's probably used twice or so. I counted once, I forgot the exact number. And Luckmann was transforming this totally. The construction problem between the transcendency three and the finite provinces of meaning is really difficult and serious. And therefore, Luckmann found an interesting, nice solution to that. While Schutz had this kind of 5 transcendencies, not really well settled in a simple article. And in notebook, you see his fighting, this long response to Morris, for example, discussing experience of transcendence of experience. It's a long debate. Schutz wasn't yet very clear how to handle this problem. But you see the difference to Luckmann. Luckmann made a holy unit, the holy triad out of it, and made the minor transcendencies of space and time, the immediate transcendency of sociality, and the grand transcendencies without society. No society mentioned here. We won't go to that. This is my background. We go to Schutz. So Schutz goes for the transcendency of social collectivity. An interesting thing to that, you don't find a lot, you find a little bit, and I should probably mention, did I do that here? Science of the social world, no, I didn't mention this here. Probably it comes later on the slides. So let me look at this one relation as such. There is one part and bit where the world of everyday life, the encounter with others, is in everyday life. And there is a bit beyond transcendence, the third transcendence. This is here. This is happening here, where we have the real relation as such. For example, friendship, sometimes translated as partnership. To make the things a bit clear and to make the difference clear. And I want to make this very strong because people are often misunderstanding it. Many people understand the life as something which is just experienced and forget that the major form of experience is action. Specific time structure, but this is the life world of everyday life, the world of action. And the world of action is the world of working. Here, the world of working. Werkwelt. And this is funny if you call it Werkwelt. In the notebooks, you find two notions in the translation of the Schutz-Luckmann text. You find operation instead of working. In the notebooks, you find working. Well, working for everyone who does not know German is an interesting word because wirken is the word which is included in Wirklichkeit. Reality is work reality. work reality. And this doesn't mean to work as a worker in German. It means to have effects on the world. It's rather linked to something like causality. All the things which are mentioned here, the things in the outer world. Schutz talks here like a Cartesian, which he wouldn't like, but he did. The things in the outer world, the physical world, he calls it sometimes. Funny enough, that's all characterizations of the world of everyday life. That's why we move to this notion of communication, but that's another topic. And here below, we find then this way where the world of everyday life is being transcended. That's in a V relation, which he also calls the immanent transcendence at several times. It's the symbolic experience of the V relation transcends the finite province of meaning of the world of everyday life and can only be experienced with the help of symbols. For example, the idea of partnership. So it's two people together, and they're just together working on one another, but they have a common idea of partnership. This is representing, it's not a doing partnership, it's a symbolic element of partnership, which makes it transcendent at this point. And that's a very interesting thing, that the two are not just the two, but they have to refer to something which is beyond, which is only represented in everyday life, which is the idea. That's the point where I want to move down collectivity to the very basis. Where do we find it in Schutz, and where's the link? And I can refer to problem, Gurwitsch called it in the correspondence between Schutz and Gurwitsch. Gurwitsch called it the Schutz problem. I would have said the Schutz problem. Schutz would have pronounced, I guess, like that. And Gurwitsch writes in German, are objects, trees and mountains for everyone, are they prepredicative? That's the Schutz problem. It's a phenomenological problem, of course, par excellence. And there is a solution. Another solution than the idealistic solution of having just the meaning common. Because remember this kind of reference Schutz is making, the very phenomenon, two people in interaction, I and you, we see the flying bird. An occurrence of the bird's flight as I cut this down, as an ever public time is simultaneous, which with our interaction, which is an event in time. This is the inner time. Here's the mind, which is synchronous with the bird's flight. Oh, sorry. This takes on particular importance for the investigation of events in the outer world, which serve as vehicles for communication, namely significant gestures and language. Sorry for cutting this off. I didn't realize that it's cutting off. And you see the same structure, the things in the outer world. I've copied the bird into that. So you have the things in the outer world which are common. Here we go. This is the object, which is the third object which he is referring to. The third object, which is common to both. I see it, you see it, and I see you seeing it. So it's a common object, like this friendship he's talking about. And that's the phenomenon that Searle, Tomasello call shared intentionality. It's not just an intentionality, it's I know that you see it too. Of course, with Schutz and with a lot of phenomenology, it's very ocular-centric. People only see. And seeing is a very idealistic phenomenon. That's why I put the arm in there as usual and show something, because with the arm you see something like the Wirkwelt. You see it also here with Heidegger and Gadamer sawing together, where they feel the wood. They feel in Black Forest, this is where they feel interactively that there is a piece of wood everyone is sensing at the same time. And this is action, and this is Wirken, from Wirklichkeit, the operation which has been called working or working in the outer world. And this is at the very boundary where Schutz see the boundary of the transcendency 3, where you have two people cooperating, and you have the third, which is in common. I wouldn't say if Schutz goes that far to say this is already overcoming the transcendency. but we can therefore look at Durkheim. Hopefully I'm not too quick. We look at Durkheim because Durkheim has a similar construction with the collectivity. Like the social collectivities of Schutz, in brackets, the public is one of the social collectivities mentioned, brackets, and Durkheim has a very similar construction, like the whole collectivity, and then it's, let's say, interactive foundation. The collectivity or collective effervescence is the phenomenon which has become so famous by Durkheim's forms, elementary forms of religious life, introduced originally by Marcel Mauss and Bouchard in their analysis on the social morphology of Inuit society in 1906, with the 2 seasons where the Inuit would go scatter around the world in summer and then come together in very close huts, have very intimate season, whole season in intimacy, and they characterize it like Durkheim as intensification of social relations. They are all in the hut for months, mostly. Spatial proximity, intimacy, affectivity, psychic exaltation is the word Durkheim would have used if he had spoken English, and expressivity. And the whole construction, of course, is taken over by Durkheim in a way that society is representing itself in collective symbols in a very similar way than meaning than as in Schutz, and enacting itself in collective rituals, as you know, thereby, and that's the word, transcending the individual. The transcendence is this kind of impression of the individual as the collectivity is something different from the collectivity. Individual is something different from collectivity. When they come together, a sort of electricity is formed by their collecting, which quickly transport them into an extraordinary degree of exaltation, is what he's saying. And this is the collectivity of the tribe or of the clans and so on. This collectivity also, as I said, is based in some kind of interactive form that he calls rather synthesis. Mais les sentiments privés ne deviennent sociaux qu'en se combinant sous l'action des forces sui generis qui développent l'association. Par suite de ces combinaisons et des interactions mutuelles qui en résultent, ils deviennent autre chose. Dann spricht von einer, he talks about a synthèse chimique, but private emotions, the very emotions which become collective, do not become social if they are not combined by forces sui generis that are the effects of their association. By virtue of these combinations and reciprocal changes, they become something different. This is the transcendence. A chemical synthesis is being produced that concentrates and unites the elements synthesized while simultaneously transforming them. This is just with someone else. This kind of synthesis of private sentiments and actions is a very similar construction he's having. This kind of effervescence, the experience of collectivity, the ecstasis of being around has become a topic, as you know, all over. It's mentioned everywhere. It's been a topos. If you look at how does it work, where is effervescence? Do you have effervescence now? You realize in most studies, Durkheim himself didn't know, he didn't mention it because didn't find it empirically because he was only working with second-hand data from ethnographies and from missionaries and texts. As you know, they had second-hand descriptions. And many analyses in the literature and fiction you find, we've been looking for, that are highly selective, even for example, if you look for football. You find fans, but they're really selective. You find only the most expressive parts, and no context, nothing to that. Even with some famous and important contributions, such as Collins, who was working on that, That's the video is from Collins. Actually, it's from Max Atkinson, an ethnomethodologist who was studying political speeches in the 1980s. Our master's voices has been the study called, but this is footage from television and cut by television, as usual in this kind of studies. So there is very little analysis, interestingly, about collective effervescence and how do collectives act. So we looked at it a little bit. Oh, that's the Schutz program. That's the wrong one. Are we back? Oh, here we go. Okay. So we looked at it a little bit. We had, in fact, with two colleagues, a research project where we went to big events, big audience events, such as Hertha BSC, when they were still playing the first Bundesliga, for example, the World Championship in football also, we've been accompanying, or for example, just to give an example, this is Effervescence when Pope Benedict entered the Olympic Stadium in 2011 in Berlin. To give you an example for the kind of effervescence we've been witnessing, videotyping, recording, participating, and so on. Some studies have been resulting from that. Very interesting if you look at these forms of enthusiasm and collectivity as Durkheim is describing. Durkheim, for example, writes, there are at once transports of enthusiasm, crying, shrieking, rolling in the dust. And since the collective sentiment cannot express itself collectively, except on the condition of observing a certain order, permitting cooperation and movements in unison, these gestures and cries naturally tend to become rhythmic and regular. This is how effervescence works. But does it work, effervescence? And what is collectivity effervescence? I've got another example from Pope Francis, who just died, who's been in Krakow in 2016 for the World Youth Day. And this is from the sermon to the youth on a large field by Pope Francis. You may realize this is not in a stadium. It's very important for various reasons. It's not an Olympic stadium, it's a large field in Krakow. And this is one of the most interactive scenes here of the sermon. Go on. Here. Okay, you see, it's not just cheering, crying, or whatever. It's a problem. There's not really something like effervescence happening. And it's the part of the whole scene, if you look at that. Francis saying, volete essere liberi? Do you want to be free? Si, some say, si. Volete essere svelti? Do you want to be chosen? Si, some say. Volete lottare per il vostro futuro? Do you want to fight for your future? See, a little bit of cheering. Non siete troppo convinti, eh? You're not too convinced about that, aren't you? And then laughing. And then he tries again. A pattern, by the way, known by a very infamous German speaker. Some people may remember. Volete lottare per il vostro futuro? Do you want to fight for your future? And then there is something like a collective answer to that. So collectivity is not just there. It's not just people happening. It's actually hard work here for Francis working on that. And you see this also here, that when he talks, liberi, svelti, then the future one, convinti, future two, then you see that it's somehow increasing. You see this kind of voices, the continuous sound of collectivity as a kind of result from the small drops. Before you just hear some voices. And now the interesting thing is in Krakow, the field you see, there's 1.3 million people. He's talking in front of 1.3 million people. There's not, this is collectivity. It's a plain form of collectivity, and still nothing happening. In Berlin, Benedict has been talking to about 60,000 people. Very different kind of context. Not only he, but even Wölki caused turbulences, acoustic turbulences. So you find this kind of collectivity is not just there, it's not just happening. There's a certain form to that. And this form is, as I try to characterize it here, is not only that they're kind of producing together a sound, but the sound must be also heard by those who produce the sound. And this is not just my guess. This is why this interaction is happening like that, because here he is realizing that this is not a sound he was projecting. This is not a reaction he was projecting. And then he's repeating it, and the audience got it, because then they are producing the kind of sound he was expecting. So the kind of collective sound is not just something happening, but something they are both relating to, almost like in a conversation. But this is conversation, and now this is the Schutz problem. This is a conversation not between me and you, but between me and a huge mass, which is not transcendent, but which is there, acting interactively in a very obvious way, in a way which you can, and which I did, objectify. It's not only an objectivation in the interaction, a fluent objectivation, and gone, we just remembered, I have recorded it, we produced some data, and we objectified it in this way, in a wonderful way, and in a misleading way at the same time. This is something like the background of for my conclusion. I won't go very much into that. It's just a conclusion which I would build on more data, but this is not the argument here. The social collectivities are not a very simple conclusion. It's not just a transcendence. It is actually a real phenomenon. It is probably no surprise that Luckman went into the institutions, because the social collectivities have been hardly started. An early example, by the way, wonderful footage you find of Billy Graham, who had also been at the Olympic Stadium in 1954 with an audience of 100,000. Billy Graham is a master of interaction with audiences. And by the way, the first one I know who was simultaneously interacting with live audiences, huge live audiences, and the television. And not only causing conversions in the live audience, but causing conversions by television. Funny conversions at that interesting topic. Secondly, the objectivation, the sound, you hear it, is a third element. It's not just the revelation. There is a third element before the bird or the sound, and it's affecting materially and medially. It's not just a physical thing, as Schutz said. It's a, shall I shout loud? You will have problems with the ears. It will affect you. I could try to sing nicely the rest of my presentation, but I cannot sing nicely, but Michaela would have to do that. It can also be turned, what I did, into an objectification as this thing, as you see, or as a sound I'm reproducing. And by the way, Michael Wetzel's my researcher there, he was working with the people in the Olympic Stadium. And the kind of sound you heard in the Olympic Stadium is a massive technical construction. There's a sound system, of course, in the stadium. It's not just sound of collectivity. It's a techno sound produced. It can be, this is also kind of objectification already. And the effervescence is the variously enacted experience of these collective forms of objectivated communication, I should say. I will go into this last point in a minute, but I want to make some more general points to that. The second conclusion is Schutz writes the provinces of meaning are incapable of socialization. But at the same time, which is funny, all the realities he had in which runs counter, for example, to what we learned about near-death experience and other religious experience. At the same time, but he also concedes in a personality manuscript that the paramount reality is the result of the secularization of the attention à la vie, as he said, which alludes to the fact that the boundedness of the life world, the everyday life world, is itself a result of the secularization process. Weber would agree immediately into this argument. And therefore, Schutz admits in the simple article that the analysis of these transcendencies is a major task of philosophical anthropology. He doesn't say phenomenology, he does say philosophical anthropology, the kind of philosophy which is built on empirical studies of human beings and non-human beings, by the way, always, which was part of philosophical anthropology. To mark the switch, I've found a quote by Husserl in his really interesting article on Phenomenology and Anthropologie, Phenomenology and Anthropology from 1941 by Husserl, where he says, while the original phenomenology, his phenomenology, starts as transcendental, anthropological, phenomenological philosophy has to be constituted new from the perspective of human, and sorry for that, the phenomenology has to be considered new from the perspective of human existence, from the perspective of philosophical anthropology. Mistype for that. So the kind of revolutionary change from the phenomenological study of that to the philosophical study of that. And by the way, at these points, Schutz also mentions the sociology of knowledge, who is accompanying this task. And there is, as a result, there's a third result, the provinces of meaning, one could argue, depend, at least as effervescence and the social collectivities here is referred to, on the communicative construction of symbolic realities. Rituals, for example, architectures, we had this talk about religious architectures, Georges Duby and his reconstruction of Gothic architecture is an example. We had a presentation of the films on VR, on events, on substances, on body techniques, and of course, of language and discourses and literary aesthetic languages and others. So what about subjectivity? What about phenomenology? I think there is, going on doing phenomenology, one should take into account the fact that the subject of doing phenomenology is massively, we would have said, not only socialized, but a subject is subjectivized. Kind of subject is produced in ways which you find, for example, when you see someone listening to music like that, or listening to music like Schutz in a concert hall, sitting there, not moving. There's a different constitution of subjectivity. So the subjectivity research, empirical research, I think is quite necessary in order to have a background and a context for that. But secondly, I think that, as Luckman said, phenomenology is a science of the subjective paradigm. I think there should be something like, there is a need and a necessity from the kind of mundane phenomenology, as Schutz called it, which differs, for example, from autoethnography in a decisive ways. While the autoethnography would situate a subject in its context, the focus of mundane phenomenology is not on a culture, but on the subjective experience, on the very subjective experience, and finding that, the thing which should be, and finding out what can be bracketed at all. And therefore, I think the structures of the life world are not a mathesis universalis, as Luckman hoped they would be, the structures of the life world as proposed by Schutz and Luckman can be used and are usable in this context as a modifiable reference point, relationing the analysis of multi-positional and multi-perspectivic subjectivities. And this is the kind of methods of the constituted subjects which are doing phenomenology. Would be my proposal. I'm coming to I'm at the end. But there's a small exercise to that. I want you to experience the difference between objectivation and objectification. And I use some data Teresa has been co-producing at a conference, and you hear this. So the question is, do you experience the difference between the objectification of collectivity and the subjectivity of a collective form of communication? Now, this is what happens first. You hear the object of something. And now I would like you to... You hear it? I skipped the knocking part. It's only the clapping part. You know this part yourself. And now the point of the knocking part is try to find a difference if you participate yourself in doing the clapping, and try to find out if there is a kind of participation in a collectivity, which, by the way, you see all the time if you hear it. In order to do so, you would have to do it very effervescently. Thank you very much.
Does it work? It does work. Thank you very much for this keynote performance. I'm sure that there are many questions, and the question is, who would like to start?
Thank you very much for your talk. I was thinking about Random Collins' interactional recall chains, because beyond being quite close, it seems to address to this specific last point of a circularity between the objectivation of collectivity and a sort of auto-alimentation of collectivity, like through the attention, the shared attention and the creation of symbols. There's a sort of renewal of collectivity, which increase the sense of belonging and the energy of the individually within a community. So I was wondering if there are some differences between this approach and what you propose, and which could be the differences.
To Collins, you mean? Oh, yes, there's many differences here. I wouldn't say it's, for example, the notion of rituals is quite different, very different. We're not talking about ritual. We talk, what Francis is here producing is an interactive rhetoric genre. And you have to know the genre. The people don't know that. You have to notice the genre in order to participate at any kind of event you are. We had this also here. You have to know the genre. You're not just interacting. You're part of a cultural pattern. And if you, for example, if you clap after the first part of the Ninth Symphony, you don't know the genre. Well, not the modern form of the genre. So the genre part is difficult to make this argument. The collectivity is not a transcendence, but it's something you can experience only subjectively. The point is about it, it's not a way outside, it's being part, it's, by the way, also the visual parts, being part of mass and producing a scene that you see the mass, which you're part of, is very decisive. With listening in the modality of acoustics, it's even more decisive because they fuse. The sound fuses and you hear the fusion. And the fusion itself, to which you co-produce, you hear the fusion and you hear that you contributed to something you're not producing. This kind of phenomenon, which is the prerequisite of effervescence, is something which is produced in a very mundane way, but which at the same time represents this difference by the way, in ways which can have very different feelings. The feelings, for example, Goebbels was producing in this three-part sequences without a repair form. What do you want? Volete, volete. It was in German. It's a different modality of affectivity. But the similarity would be with Collins, then it's linked to affectivity. But affectivity, first of all, is a bodily affectivity. Emotions are a form of communication which are produced on the basis of affectivity, which work. And this is Schutz's world of working, by the way, the Wirkwelt. It's not just meaning only. Meaning is decisive, but meaning without the materiality, the bodily, doesn't work. Behavior is not all, but there is also behavior to that. And this is part of the thing. And for collectivity, I mean, this is the nice thing. You experience collectivity. And this experience, Teresa has shown this also with the string quartet, you can only experience it subjectively. It's like artificial intelligence. If you just write a text, you haven't got it. You have to get it yourself subjectively. And this is the science Schutz is proposing. And I think this is a necessary science in the age of AI, particularly the science of subjectivity, which is not just production of science without subjective meanings, and therefore it's important. And that's a difference to Collins, who hasn't got his notions. But the method, of course, is different because it's kind of secondary use. It's very different. And I know also people who work with his theory on audiences. We could talk about that, but there's a huge difference.
Thank you very much. I would like to ask you, can you hear me?
Oh.
Is this working?
Yeah. No,
yeah?
I haven't seen it.
Okay. I would like to ask you if you would make a difference between the phenomenon of joint attention, which we have in the case
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's fine. I can hear you very well. I can hear you very well, yeah.
Yeah, so I'd like to make a difference between the phenomenon of joint attention, which is the case when two people are looking at the bird. I have to admit, I don't see where Schutz's problem is here. That's another discussion.
Yeah.
And a certain form of consciousness.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah.
Your analysis that doing something together might create something like a we experience. Although I'm not sure if this is enough, right? So I think joint attention would be at the bottom, but to really get to a we experience that we are here, there has to be something like an identification.
Yeah.
And that is not only, I don't only mean that in the cognitive sense. But, you know, I could be forced to standing in a collective and clap. And if I don't clap, I know that something's going to happen to me. And then I don't think I'm going to experience the collectivity in a way as if I'm, you know, happily identifying with the community and clapping. So my question is just if there could be some more differentiations maybe in how we experience collectivity.
Massively, yes, of course. I mean, the first thing, shared attention is not just existing. And to Schutz, it's a real problem if you just assume that the other one sees the same thing, or if you're part of the same process of identifying the same. This is the bit where Searle, Tomasello tell that the change from egoistic action to a collective intentionality. The turn which you make in pointing, where the reciprocity of perspectives, and especially Schutz, the exchangeability of standpoints, is suddenly working with 9 months about. This is what's happening with 9 months. And it's part of a cognitive action. And then you have shared intentionality, but this is part of an embodied interaction. There is not just You need a body, so you need even to see what bodies look at, and you need a mark on your notebook which says, oh, there's someone else here, and so on. So you need a sign of these things for joint attention. The notion about a we is more difficult than a collectivity. What I wanted to say about a collectivity is, of course, you produce the forms of collectivity. If you have 20 people clapping and 20 not clapping, you have a funny form of collectivity, which is different from the one everyone cheering. So that's different forms of collectivity. And the latter one would produce probably something like a we feeling, because we are doing somehow the same. The we is only an index of certain form of collective forms of communicative actions, of coordinating the actions to do something which appears as if a collective were there. The building, this room, does such a thing. It produces a lot of places and produces them in a way that you are part of an audience. You didn't want to become such a thing. It's been produced. That's a material construction of an audience, of a collectivity. You are part of that if you want or not. That's part of it. You can leave, then you're not. But by your bodily presence, you're set in. That's a form of bodily subjectivation, which is part of a collectivity. And therefore, that's an empirical differences, which are the collective forms of that. If you go for this, what I want to show you was, for example, 2 forms of having this cheering collectivity. But this was the sound of a stadium. The point about Benedict then was that there was a choir of 2,000 people in the stadium singing all the time, but no one else sang. Funnily, we were watched quite a lot. So the collectivity was kind of a very much technical production. Only at one point, when we sang, if I may I just sing once? It was at one point, because I was a participant observer. When we sang suddenly, before Benedict left, we sang, Großer Gott, wir loben dich, and so on. Everyone sang, and I felt, wow, this is something special. And I went to the underground, and a woman said to me, oh, there was this one moment. This was really intense. Okay, this was when we heard each other singing. This is the sound of collectivity. And there was something to that, which is also produced in various settings. But these are empirical forms. And what I want to say is the collectivity needs the subjectivity. You have to listen to that, and you have to hear it as a methodological prerequisite. Thank you.
Thank you, Hubert. Just a question, how do multiple realities fit into this? Because it sounds to me like a collective action of the kind you're talking about is actually like an epoche. I mean, you're suddenly transported into another reality.
The collectivity, you mean?
The collective action.
Well, I've shown you this quick bit when Benedict entered like an emperor in the Papamobile. By the way, they had to produce it in the Olympic Stadium because on the streets it wouldn't have happened at all. And then it was something like a special occasion. But most of the time, this collectivity sits there and it's boring. Even football, soccer, is most of the time really boring. Even if there's 70,000 people, unless you get BVB Dortmund or some people, 10,000 fans of Hertha shouting or whatever, it's quite boring. So collectivity is not just effervescent, it's not just a different reality. That's an empirical question. The methodological question is, that's interesting if you look at the notebooks that Schutz mentions at various spots where the multiple reality would fit in. And he also cuts the bits of the symbol article into that, but he didn't integrate it. This was Luckmann's problem. Luckmann's problem was, in fact, 2 things about that, about the multiple realities. First, he didn't, the difference between the subjective realities of your consciousness, of being drunk, for example, or on psychedelic drugs on the one hand, or being part of a production with symbols, musical production, for example, where symbols are working acoustically, physically, whatever, are 2 different worlds. He didn't really link with one another. And Luckmann's solution, I think, was really congenial. It was different, but it was specific because he used the multiple realities for the transcendencies, and he just skipped the collectivity part. I'm going with him. I'm going with him. Luckman told me, you know, by the transcendencies, there are transcendencies, there is a boundary to grant transcendencies, but how they're filled, I don't think there's something substantial about it. And they can be filled in different ways. And the second thing is, I think, probably for the Schutz circle, quite interesting also. If you look how he transformed the notion of science. It's not the theory of science. Luckman was teaching the theory of science in Frankfurt. I had a manuscript of him from Frankfurt still. He knew the theory of science very well, but he didn't introduce it and insert it into the structures of the life world. I think for one reason, because Schutz took the theoretical attitude as the paradigmatic to doing science. And to Luckman, if you read him, if you read the structure of the life world, theory includes conspiration theories, includes especially what intellectuals do and what the public, Luckman did like much less than Schutz, included that one. And Luckman therefore didn't do it as a theory of science, but just as theoretical attitude. And the theoretical attitude is not specific, or it's not a specificum of science, because he knew the world of empirical sciences, and this didn't fit anymore. So this is the two transformations. They're all related to the multiple realities, because as you know, this theory of the science should have been the last part, the last big chapter of the structures of the life world. Very congenial construction, I think. And to my mind, Luckman didn't agree to that, but to my mind, his rendering was already an aggiornamento, was already an adaptation from, let's say, the 19th century, mid-20th century kind of culture of phenomenology to a modernized post-60 big science, empirical sociology kind of world. And I think we have to do this too. We have to adapt it, and we have to, but still keep subjectivity, the study of subjectivity, as the major reference. And I really think Schutz is one of the few to serve as this kind of reference.
I have myself a final question, but I only ask it when you are able to answer in one sentence.
Okay, try. So.
Now we would like to be 7:15 in the cafe.
Okay.
So no, I still do not understand why you are so fascinated by Durkheim, because electricity synthesis, chemical synthesis, isn't this more than a metaphor?
No, it is. Hubert had the same metaphor, by the way, the synthesis. He was a chemist. I had this last seminar on Durkheim, and what I told about collectivity, the kind of experiencing the collective, I think this is Durkheim's idea. I think this is what he originally meant, and I find this in Durkheim, and I think this is a real, if you take off effervescence, which is interesting, but only kind of a specific phenomenon, but this notion of collectivity and reinserting collectivity, that's an idea which is, I think, that's the idea of sociology, and that's somehow linking also this kind of action to something else. Anyhow, I think this is a very smart idea, and this was a very long one sentence, but it's the kind of sentence. The small thing I may add, the sociology of knowledge of Durkheim is really impressive. The whole I mean, the Durkheim program, not the person, but the whole Durkheim group program. This is actually an invention of the sociology of knowledge, and I'm really honoring them. And I think that's one of the bases also German sociologists should acknowledge.
Okay, once again, we can do this clapping thing. Thank you very much, Hubert. Thanks to all of you. Thank you for this presentations today and this long day. And now, who would like to join us at the Coffee House Weimar we live at the entrance there, and it is
Sitze ich eine Woche dran. So viele Fehler drin. Das ist unglaublich.
do not know whether it is raining,
Wahnsinnig.
still raining. It's a noisy street, the Währinger Straße, but we can't do any other. So we need to go there. And you can also go for yourself, of course. See you later. Thank you.
Ich habe noch so viele Fehler in dieser blöden Präsentation.
Aber das macht nichts.
Diese scheiß Präsentation.
Aber es ist wieder, oder? Ja.